Hello, and welcome to another year of the Storied Arcs podcast. I'm your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And as is our custom, today we'll be doing an intro episode, which we call a Creator Spotlight or a Zero episode. And the subject matter today is the work of Sarah Gailey. And we'll be covering two books in the next month. The first is Eat the Rich, which has its own creative team, which we'll discuss. And the second is Know Your Station, which also has some overlap, but a different creative team. We're going to knock them out together, and I think it's going to be a really fun discussion comparing, contrasting Eat the Rich, Know Your Station. Some very similar vibes, similar themes, but really different genres.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
There's some overlap in the genres. This is it's a similar idea to what we did with
Mark
the
Russell
Apocalyptic Trilogy. Well, no,
yeah, sure.
and I guess Mark Russell as well too, with Flintstones and
Not All Robots. Kind
of like how not all robots was like an expansion of some of the stuff that Mark Russell and Steve P were doing in Flintstones. But I was thinking more of the Apocalyptic Trilogy with James Tynion IV and Eric Donovan, in that although those books were a lot more similar, the idea that there is a very specific theme that kind of follows through, and that those books, I think when you read all three of them, even though they had conceived them, kind of as a spiritual trilogy, they are in conversation with each other. These two books, I think, is interesting because I don't know if Sarah Gailey had that in mind, but these books are also in conversation with each other, in very much tackling similar themes, but coming at it, yeah, you're right, from like completely different directions,
Yeah, I mean, there are.
I don't know how much. I don't know how much they thought about that as did they write these one and then another? Are these ideas that maybe they had together? Kind of like we talked about with what Tynion said, that those three initial ideas, even though they may have morphed and changed over the years, the initial ideas for each of those books came to him at once, and he started working on them. And then as he expanded them out, that became mimetic, eugenic, and cognetic. I could almost see something similar here, where Gailey was sitting down and tackling these ideas, working these ideas out in their mind, and kind of almost getting these two like branch ideas, one kind of going off in one direction, one in the other, and then deciding to tackle both because they feel like they have similar roots, even though the ends are and the means are wildly different.
Right.
Yeah.
I could see it starting as one seed of an idea.
Yeah.
And as they keep developing, they splinter off, and it's like, oh, shoot,
exactly.
this is different books now.
There was a similar root in terms of the idea, the concept they wanted to tackle. So,
but I think these are certainly spiritual siblings. And
definitely.
Why don't I read the synopses of both? Unless you want to do all the Eat the Rich discussion, then all the Know Your Station. But I think since we're talking about them as a pair anyway, and we're non-spoiler in our, preview episodes here.
Yeah.
So this is just the synopsis from, first of all, you'll gather something from the title of each book.
Definitely.
Which I think hints at kind of their lineage, their idea. But here's the synopsis for Eat the Rich from Boom Studios. Welcome to Crestfall Bluffs. With law school and her whole life ahead of her, Joey plans to spend the summer with her boyfriend Aster in his seemingly perfect hometown. It's a chance to finally meet his family and childhood friends, all while enjoying a vacation where every need is attended to. But beneath the affluent perfection lies a dark, deadly rot. Will Joey discover the truth before it's too late? And even if she does, can she survive to tell the tale? So I think that's a pretty good synopsis. I sometimes I really rag on these like studio synopses because they will write them for the first issue, then the whole series will be out, and on their website they don't bother updating them, and sometimes the series ends up going in a different direction than the first issue. Teaser.
The synopsis they wrote there is what you get for the whole series, even though maybe it's just a setup for the first issue. So, but no, I think that's pretty good, and a lot of that is the setup for the first issue, and I don't think it's a spoiler to say for either of these books there is the thing you're reading and the thing the character is experiencing, and then there's the level below that becomes that is uncovered to both the audience and our characters. So there is that synopsis talked about, the rot below, or something like that. That's something that's a theme with both of these books here. So it's I don't think it's a spoiler to say that you should be primed to think that as you read both these.
Well,
both
and
these
we
comics.
know what the social commentary will be when the book is
Yes.
called Eat the Rich,
Yes.
and the synopsis mentions, it's this affluent community, every
Yes.
need is tended to,
Yeah.
but there's something below the surface. It's like, okay, so there could be some
And
commentary there.
even right there, we're talking about the outsider coming in, meeting the family for the first time, not just the family, but the whole community there. So yeah,
Right.
there's already a setup there. But yeah, I mean, you're right though. Just
But
using
it's
the
always
title "Eat the Rich."
it's the outsider entering that community, right?
Yes.
Which
Yeah, yeah,
is a key distinction. Because that's always your entry point. And then the synopsis for Know Your Station has a tagline: a killer hunts the rich in space, with an ellipsis. And then it says, the wealthiest people in the solar system abandoned the Earth for a private sanctuary in space, leaving the rest of us to die amidst cataclysmic climate change. But the 1% won't be safe for long. A murderer is on the loose, specifically targeting the super rich. Soon, Elise, an employee of the billionaire space station, is wrapped up in a deadly investigation, with each issue featuring a new, diabolically different kill. And that's the end of the synopsis, which again, I think this probably speaks to Sarah's talent in saying, by the time the first issue is going to the publisher, the whole 6-issue, 5-issue thing is mapped out. They're both 6 issues, or they're each 5 issues?
Yeah, both five.
The whole 5-issue thing is mapped out, so there's not going to be any massive deviations from where the book started and where it ends.
Yeah.
Which I think is, I would imagine almost everybody who does the 5-issue miniseries has to stick pretty closely to their original plan.
Yeah, I would imagine a lot of that's in the initial pitch. To,
Even the 12 issue
publisher.
like maxi,
Yeah. Oh, the general idea is there. I think with 12 issues, there's a little wiggle room. With 5 issues though, by the time issue 1 is published, issue
right.
2
by
is
the
in
time
the
you're
can.
reading fan
issue
reactions
2 should
online.
be in the can. Issue 3 should be close to being in the can. Issue 3 is probably being finished. Issue 4 is in the process. So you've got to be at least 3 issues deep in order to hit your publishing schedule. So yeah, no, so at that point you're pretty much locked in. So I mean, if it isn't obvious right now, what these books have in common is the main theme we're talking about is that gap between the rich or the
uber
super
rich. Yeah, right.
and the rest of the world. So it's that income gap, that wealth gap, the inequality there between not just the haves and the have-nots. There's the have everythings and everybody else. So the running commentary on both these books is dealing with the world that those people, quote unquote, those people, the super duper rich people have created and forced the rest of the world to live in. So yeah, no, it's knowing that these books here have come from the same writer,
and not very far apart. It'd be one thing. Yeah. It's even one thing to say, oh, they wrote this, at the beginning of their career, and then 20 years later they wrote this one, and it's on the same topic, and see how they changed over time. No. Yeah. This is like almost a continuation.
Yeah, it really
of the thought. And the letter in the back of Know Your Station. I don't know if did you read that in trade?
No, I read that one in single issue. I'll probably reread it.
I'm gonna save that letter
so
for when we do that book.
Okay,
because there's some. I wouldn't even call it spoilers, but I want to be sensitive, to what our listeners. But
but you're right.
Shocking statement about the theme.
Yeah, but you're right about them as being back to back. I mean, these are relatively contemporary books in terms of kind of the things that we talk about. A lot of our books are 21st century for the most part. But both these books came out in the last handful of years. Eat the Rich issue one came out August 2021, went from August 2021 to December 2021. And then Know Your Station issue one was December 2022 and ended April 2023. So, a 12-month gap from the end of Eat the Rich to the beginning of Know Your Station, which means from a work standpoint, effectively going from one book to the other. Now, Gailey had some other comic work they were working on, and probably also still working on their prose work. We can talk about that there. But in terms of creator-owned stuff, the stuff that they were bringing to the table on their own, these are the first two things, in the comic space
Right.
specifically.
Yeah, which
So
I mean, like clearly an experienced writer, because
yeah,
these are
yeah,
not these are not the work of an aspiring amateur.
yeah,
I think these are both fully fleshed out ideas, ready to go, and I think kind of the clever thing about doing two similar books through Boom around the same time, almost back to back sequentially, is it gave me the impression that when I got Eat the Rich, and full disclosure, which I guess we usually talk about how we stumbled across these books, and full disclosure, I picked up Eat the Rich number one because there was a Jenny Frison variant, and
yeah,
it's stunningly beautiful.
yeah. That's right.
And then eventually, read the book, and I was like, oh my gosh, well, this is actually pretty great. I just was like, I'll buy it for the cover, and you gotta love when that works out. And then when Know Your Station popped up on the shelves, 12 months later, I was like, Sarah Gailey, I knew that name. I was like, in fact, I've read something, and it's like kind of a clever little trick, because it was one of those where I wasn't current on Eat the Rich even at the time. And if it was like Eat the Rich number 12, it'd be like, yeah, I've seen that series. But it was like another series popped up by
A
the
new
same
one. Yeah.
author. And
Hmm.
I was like, oh, wow, this author's blowing up right now, which was a little bit of an illusion because they were both 5-issue series. On the other hand, I think Sarah Gailey is blowing up right
Well,
now. And now I
you
see their
were,
name in Marvel.
yeah, you were premature on that by a little bit, by maybe about, if you saw Know Your Station one when it came out in December 2022, you were, yeah, you were off by about six, in terms of, in terms of their comic career starting to blow up a little bit. So I guess we should get into it right now. Do you want
Yeah,
to?
let's go for it. I mean,
Yeah, we'll move
unless
into.
you have a different way that you entered Eat the Rich, that.
No, I read
Um,
both of these because you pointed them out to me. Um,
okay.
but now when we talk about Eat the Rich there, when we get down to the credits there, I actually I know the work of Pius Bak a little more because I've read some of stuff that he has drawn. But I had not read anything by Sarah Gailey. However, after having read both these books, because you had mentioned them, I was on the lookout for their names. So later on, when they had some entries into Marvel, and started making uh, small entries into one of the big two publishers, I was more aware of it.
Right.
So on a similar line to what you said of, oh, I read something by that person, right? I know that author, and then continue to follow them as they go. I'm now in that same boat. But yeah, I came to these books because you had mentioned them as potentials. Maybe it was
Well, it's one of those things where it's like
Eat the
fair
Rich
or
first. Yeah.
unfair, but when an author gets their name on a Marvel book,
Oh no, no,
like
it matters.
they will be more prominently displayed in the comic shop,
It no,
right?
it absolutely
You
matters
kind of have
because
to go in looking for the Boom
yeah,
books,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
unless
Because
it's a tiny something's killing the children book.
yeah, but that only happens because Tynan was at DC. Like
Right.
that
Oh,
doesn't
sure.
happen because Tynan was own. It happened because he started off doing his own stuff, went to DC, got massive at DC, and then can scale back from the for hire stuff and just focus on his own creator own stuff. So yeah, no, it is, and Gailey has an interesting path, a path I think you and I were talking about that's maybe becoming a little more common for people who want to write comics, but maybe don't start out in the medium. They prior to their comic work was known as for their prose writing, whether it's novels, novellas, short stories, things of that nature, almost always in the horror, sci-fi, fantasy belt. a range in those genres, which when you read both Eat the Rich and Know Your Station, um, fall squarely in whatever Venn diagram of those three genres is. Maybe a little less sci-fi in Eat the Rich, maybe a little more fantasy there. Know Your Station's probably a little more sci-fi, a little less fantasy. But those are the stories that they're writing, and for their writing, um, Hugo Awards, Nebulas, both nominated and won, and those are all for what we'll call genre fiction, right? Sci-fi
Right.
fantasy stuff there. And then I I have to assume from those accolades, from those stories, moved into comics. Pretty much started off at Boom doing some license work. I think they have credits writing for some of the Steven Universe books, which
Yep.
I know nothing about other than it's a Cartoon Network, is or was a Cartoon Network show. Then there was Eat the Rich, and also kind of at the same time they got Eat the Rich, which is their own book. They started writing the Vampire Slayer, which is part of the larger Buffyverse of shows and comics, which have a robust life in comics in terms of um like official canon additional seasons of the story of the show.
Right. And my
So
suspicion has always been that those far surpass the show in terms of quality, because the show was it was campy and fun and whatever at the time, but it was like a Warner Brothers, like CW caliber show in terms of its production quality. It's
well,
crazy,
the
you
the
got to make 24
the
episodes
part of the
a
production
season.
was just when it was produced. It's they didn't have the budgets for it. But story wise, yeah, the larger Buffyverse has brought in just like major heavy hitter talent, like
Right.
established comic people, to continue those stories, and also someone like Sarah Gailey, who was a literal up and comer at the time. But so this book, The Vampire Slayer, I don't know. I think it falls later in the timeline of Buffy, because these stories fall kind of whenever. But again, we're talking about a licensed property. I'm going to assume maybe that Sarah was a Buffy fan. Didn't come to it blind and had stories
Right.
to add to it. And said they got that at a very similar time when Know Your Station when Eat the Rich #1 came out. So there is their own book and then this other licensed book. And then, as we said, Eat the Rich went 5 issues. And then when that ended, about a year later, Know Your Station came out for another 5 issue run. And, you know, starting as Know Your Station was wrapping up from a publishing standpoint, meaning that the writing and all that stuff was already done. Um, Sarah's name started popping up over at Marvel. Started with a couple anthologies. They were in Marvel's Voices Pride #1 for 2023, which is their yearly issue. They put out. They wrote a story. That their little short story was a Black Cat Gambit story, which is a pair of thieves, which is really fun. They also added to the Crypt of Shadows anthology, which was a Halloween themed. Uh, their story was a Hulk and Werewolf by Night. Didn't read Crypt of Shadows. Don't really care too much about. Never been big into Marvel horror. Never been huge into horror in general. So I think both of these books they have horror elements to them, and it's a matter of I don't think you and I come to books for the horror. It's just if we
No,
come
I
to
was
a
going to
book,
say it's actually a remarkable amount of horror we've discussed on the podcast,
but
considering neither of us gravitate to horror for horror's sake.
exactly, that's where I was going. It's never the reason we pick up a book.
Like,
But
I will pick it up in spite of it being horror,
yes, yeah.
because I feel like in
If the
these
story
books,
is there, if the
the
creative team
social
is there,
commentary was good.
if the larger
Um,
meaning is there. So, but yeah, so seeing Sarah Gailey now kind of transition, I'm sure they'll always do. That Boom gave them their start. I would imagine there's some loyalty there. And who knows, maybe someday we see the big Image book, depending on how those creator deals work. But seeing them at Marvel now and seeing, since you get your foot in the door, you do some short stories for some anthologies that come out. And then very recently they were the head writer for the new White Widow series, which is the first. the White Widow, aka Yelena Belova, aka Florence Pugh from the MCU. For those who have not read or know the history of the Black Widows, Yelena as the White Widow, using that moniker that was coined by Kelly Thompson during her run on a Black Widow series, because Yelena had always been another Black Widow, either in opposition to, an ally to, or a replacement for the original Black Widow,
Right.
Natasha Romanoff. Um, her existence has always been in specific relation to Natasha, the OG. So taking on a new name and now getting her own story, her own actual comic as White Widow, it's a step forward for the character. There's also the idea that Yelena is also part of the new Thunderbolts team in the comics, which is suspiciously similar to the Thunderbolts team that's been announced for the new
I don't know. I don't see the
MCU movie.
connection.
Yeah, and her characterization has changed over the years, and anyone who's watched either the Black Widow movie or the Hawkeye series on Disney Plus for the Marvel Studios, I think you can't help but see that Florence Pugh steals every scene that she's in as Yelena.
Oh yeah.
She's
Yeah.
absolutely incredible, and the energy and the characterization that she brings is really fun. And I'm not saying that the comics have moved towards that specifically, but there is a lightening of Yelena's character and a way to bring more humor to her books by having her be the straight man, which is kind of what we see in the live action stuff. Where they're so straightforward, they're so transparent about who they are, what they do, and what their abilities are, aka killing people. That there's humor in the fact that like there's no artifice right there.
Right.
Um, so it's interesting to see that translate into the comics now, and that is what I think Sarah Gailey has done so far in the White Widow book. Um, Yelena is more interesting now, I think, than we've seen her in the past. And again, that started, I believe, with Kelly Thompson's Black Widow run, and then to see what Gailey has taken from that into now a solo series has been really cool. And it makes me wonder. I think something that you and I had chatted about was, okay, now their foot's in the door at Marvel. What does that mean now? And White Widow is a small miniseries. It'll be 5, maybe 6 issues, something like that. It was planned that way.
Right.
Both DC and Marvel are kind of miniseries crazy and heavy right now, but it is a way for newer talent to get on board and get their name out there. So
Well, and
so
and I think
yeah.
one of my favorite things that can happen, and I'm not claiming to be prescient or see the future here, but it's Alessandro Miracola who's doing the art for White Widow. If in a year or 6 months you see Sarah Gailey and Alessandro announce an image book or a boom book, that's going to be great. It's like, oh, they got paired up at a for hire, and they were
Yeah.
like, we totally get each other. Let's do something where we have total creative freedom.
Oh
And
yeah, yeah.
we own the book, we own the characters.
Oh, and even
And that's one of the most amazing things that happens out of
yeah.
for hire comics. No offense to the storytelling and the characters, which I haven't read that White Widow book. I did pull it, so I've got a stack of it, but when it's going to be 6 issues, I just hold it and read all at once.
But I mean, I think even before that, you could see them work on another Marvel book potentially.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No,
Like
I mean, yeah, I
they'll
could see Marvel saying,
they can
all right,
move
let's
to another book. Maybe maybe it's another miniseries, or maybe they jump on and take on an ongoing, depending on how it goes. But that can be the progression. You start on a miniseries, maybe a couple miniseries, and then if that works out, then maybe then you're put on a bigger name, because as the White Widow, specifically Yelena Belova, um, again, she was always just the other Black Widow, but her stock has as a character has risen thanks to the MCU, thanks to Florence Pugh, specifically. So, but still not like, we're not talking like an A-list character, like not even like a B-list. It's still pretty far down in the Marvel Comics universe kind of world. So, you give her, you give to a team that maybe you're trying something out on. that Marvel's just trying to, hey, let's see what you've got here, working in our universe, working with our editors, working with our, how we assemble stories and things like that. It's almost kind of like a trial run, you know.
Yeah.
And then if that goes well, you move on. So okay, you've handled this character, what's the next one? Is it a step up from there? Is it a team up book so you can write multiple characters? Whatever it is, it feels a little bit like kind of an audition, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and
Um,
what I would love to see for someone like Sarah who has clearly defined uh like issues that they like to work on,
yeah.
I would love to see them get a book, a Marvel book like, say, a Daredevil who is always dealing with the rich and powerful, or uh, put them on Iron Man and say, okay, well, you've got a problem with billionaires. Here, write a billionaire.
Well, yeah,
Write a supposedly just billionaire,
yeah. Well, yeah, yes. Howard
which
Tony
would
Stark
be a
not
great
currently,
subversion.
yeah, but Tony Stark, not currently a billionaire right now. Um, that
Yeah, is that in Jerry Dugan's
Yeah,
run?
in
Yeah,
Invincible Iron Man, yeah, not currently a billionaire, but I know what you're saying there. The idea of um,
right. Yeah, it's like, and
give them the
if they move to
character,
DC, give them Green Arrow.
yeah,
It's like,
give them the character that would force them to do the inversion of the kind of stories they've been writing, and tell it from a different perspective, and give their take on that. No, I think that'd be cool. I think that'd be fun. So yeah, no, I think it'll be interesting to see, um, once this White Widow series wraps up here in a few months, what's next announced from them and Marvel. What's the next thing in the pipeline that, if they have something next, they're already working on it. Because at this point, I assume all the scripts for White Widow are done. Given I
right,
think we're 2 or 3 issues in out of the miniseries, so I'd imagine their work's done on the writing end. So what's the next thing that they're doing at Marvel? When do they announce it? What are we looking at? So, they're someone that, again, because you told me to read, you put Eat the Rich and Know Your Station, these 2 books on my radar. That there's someone that I'm going to follow now. I'm going to keep an eye on what their output is. Do they stay at Marvel again? Are they sticking to Boom with their creator owned stuff? Do they do a big image book? Does DC come in and swoop them up for something? Are they exclusive to Marvel right now, or are they total freelance? Can they work for both sides of the street? So, I'm interested. I'm keeping an eye on them keeping their name, somewhere where I can see it and just be on alert anytime it pops up on a new book. So
yeah. Let's talk about the art team for Eat the Rich,
sure.
because we've got Pius Bak, who
Yeah.
uh is taking an illustrated by credit, which I assume means pencils and inks.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
people can call it a number of things. Sometimes they just say art by, sometimes it's illustrated by, sometimes it's strictly pencils or inks.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm sure there's some. I don't want to say like guild rules. I don't think, because there's obviously no union there, but there are, maybe it's artist preference in terms of how
Right.
you're.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
it's just like, in TV shows, sometimes an actor will have a, special appearance by credit
Yeah.
instead of a guest
Yeah.
appearance by, and it's
Yeah.
like, okay, whatever. Their agent worked it out, and
Yeah.
whatever they want is whatever they
Yeah.
want. It's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. So
Um,
so yeah, I think for both these books, we'll refer to them as the artist, because the in terms of credits, both these books have a writer, artist, colorist, and letterer. So under artist, I think it will assume pencils and inks at the very least,
yeah,
because there is no separate inker listed for either one of these. So,
yeah,
yeah. So for Eat the Rich, we have Pius Bach. They it's the one thing we're gonna find with both of these books, in terms of the specifically the art team, and really the letters too, all of it. um they mostly have all uh, done work for smaller press independent publishers, and a lot of licensed work, whether it's at some place like Boom or Dark Horse or IDW, places that do a lot of licensed comics. But there's not a lot of DC and Marvel work for anyone, associated with these books. Maybe a cover here and there, maybe some spot work here and there, but there are no super long runs for anybody working on either of these books. I think the most regular big two work that anyone in this group has is the current work that Sarah Gailey's doing. You know,
Yeah.
so someone like Pius Bak, I had mentioned that I knew the artist for Eat the Rich um uh before I knew that name. I recognized that name before I recognized Sarah Gailey's, and that's because Pius Bak had done some work on two licensed properties that I had read, one being Firefly um at Boom, and another being The Magicians. Did you ever read The Magicians by Lev Grossman?
I did. I read the books, not the adaptations.
Yeah.
And then I've been meaning to watch the show because I actually heard the show is pretty great.
The show's pretty great because they they basically do their own thing because they age up the characters uh basically I think because they're easier to work with because it's easier to find characters actors in their 20s versus in their teens. So
Right.
that changes. That's a fundamental change in the story, but the TV show is good because it does its own thing. But the comic adaptation, so there's two things that they did, and Pius Bach drew both of them. The first is an OGN, which kind of runs concurrently to the books. It takes
Okay.
you get the story of a character that kind of exits the main narrative, and we kind of follow what that character does. And then there was an actual kind of mini series that's like a sequel. It's further down the line. It's like a new class of students that shows up at school. Um,
Okay.
yeah,
Which is
so
like it's one of those things where it's like you fans of like Harry Potter are just like, how come more of this stuff doesn't exist? But it's kind of there are a lot of like fanfic books, but not
yeah,
like
yeah,
published. And
exactly,
it's like they've
yeah,
got it so locked down that
yeah.
there's never been a comic
No,
adaptation where it's
no.
like, why couldn't you just tell a story from a student who was there 10 years before Harry or
Or
30
10
years
years
after?
after. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. No,
Um,
because the school exists, the world exists, but you're only ever told it around the characters that we follow. And
right. And
so
and
what?
fans can't help but fill
Yeah,
out and populate those stories.
exactly.
People
Yeah,
have always wanted a Marauders story
yeah.
of some
So
kind.
yeah, and so it was cool to read that Magician's book. Um, as to date though, those are the only two kind of expansions of that universe. It's not really an active IP, but if you enjoyed the Lev Grossman books, I was just reading both of those, and as I mentioned, Pius Bach, he illustrated both of them. He also did some other, if we keep along the theme of licensed properties. At Boom, he worked on a couple of Jim Henson books, both Labyrinth and Dark Crystal, in terms of those properties existing in comic form. Um, did some licensed work at Dark Horse, done some work with on the Stranger Things title, and a book at Dark Horse called Skull and Bones, which I discovered is it's a tie-in, maybe like a sequel, a prequel, or something like that to a Ubisoft game, a video game that's coming out. I think it's scheduled for early 2024, which it basically looks like an open world pirate game.
Oh
Um,
yeah. No, I've heard of that.
yeah. Um,
Which yeah, Assassin's Creed Black Flag kind of paved the way for the open world pirate game.
yeah, it's that sort of thing there. So there was a tie-in comic that it might have been a prequel, like a setup, like here's the origin story of the thing you'll be playing in the game, or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, Pius Bog worked on that for Dark Horse. Um, in terms of ongoing, I outside of Eat the Rich, like ongoing interior work.
Right.
Um, the other one that I really found was this book in IDW called The Night Owl Society, with writer Bach Venhouse. So not a lot of ongoing outside of these licensed properties. There's some eh, there's some, covers, variant covers, which something that all artists are going to have. I'm not going to go and list all those things there. The one thing I will mention is very recently, as in just this past Christmas, being Christmas of 2023, he contributed a story to this Stuff of Nightmares anthology, which is a line of it's an anthology book um, written by R.L. Stein, who people know from Goosebumps
Right.
and Are You Afraid of the Dark? Is that his too? I'm not quite certain. But this
I
was
think so. Either way,
it,
he's having a moment with the Goosebumps adaptation right
yeah,
now.
yeah, yeah. There's from Goosebumps. This stuff of nightmares is this comic line. And this past Christmas, there was a special one shot called Sleigh Ride, that R.L. Stein wrote and Pius Bak drew. So again, most of his work out there is going to be licensed property stuff, and so again, your mileage is going to vary in terms of what your interest is on that. For
But it's
whatever
still
reason,
an interesting portfolio to
it is,
say,
yeah,
you've got that kind of range.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
we're gonna get, I think, pretty not in a menacing negative way, but into the weeds, I think in a positive way when we get to this series. But the thing that jumped out to me about Pius Bach's work in Eat the Rich is that this is someone who understands how to convey beats through static images on a page, and not going to get into great detail about it now, except to say at the end of the first issue of Eat the Rich, the last 2 pages of the book, there is something happening very quickly, and it switches from kind of a horizontal 4 or 5 panel grid to a 9 panel page, but they're staggered offset. Like they're not nine, like you would normally see a 9 panel grid.
Yeah, yeah.
They are
Oh, I know what
offset
you're talking
little
about. Yeah,
boxes,
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I can
and
remember. Yeah,
which is a little unsettling. And then you go to the next page and it's a full page, but it's conveying simultaneous events. So you have this unsettling lead up with 9 offset pages or panels. Then you go to one page where there are overlaid panels of things all happening at the same time. And it's like, bam, you got the sequence, you got the timing of all of these events happening in close proximity to one another. Just and I think the final page just has one word of dialogue on it. And so the sequence, the storytelling is relying pretty heavily on Pius to end the issue on a kind of a cliffhanger. And it's just
but
masterfully done.
yeah. Well, we don't. Yeah, and I know what you're talking about there, but we don't want to get too much into the weeds right now with
No, I can't help it. I get excited.
with the actual story
Yeah.
there. Um, I think part of it too, maybe, and this could be in terms of why we don't see his name more often. Is I just double checked there. I believe he's Lithuanian. So there aren't a whole lot of Lithuanian artists, and I don't know how easy or hard it is to work with. But I think that also ties into the colorist on Eat the Rich, which is Roman Titov, who is Russian, or at least has done like a crap ton of Russian comics that you've never heard of, but you look them up and it's just a whole bunch of titles in Cyrillic. Um, but in terms of there are some Western things that he's done. Again, common theme, a whole lot of licensed properties. Like you'll see his name where he's colored issues of, Buffy and Angel, Cyberpunk 2077, Cowboy Bebop. Um, it's a lot of the work that maybe that he's getting at places like, again, Boom, Dark Horse, IDW, places that have these licensed properties where fans of those properties just eat up any and all content they can get. And again, in a lot of cases, specifically, I think for like Buffy and Angel, Firefly, things like that, and maybe it's because Whedon himself has a connection as someone who's written comics. The expansion of those shows into the comic realm have been so popular and have been so good with so many great writers and creators and artists working on those stories to keep telling more and more tales in those universes. So it's a lot of stuff again that Roman Titov has done. He colored I mentioned the stuff of Nightmares, that R.L. Stein anthology. He colored the original 4 issue anthology, weirdly not the Sleigh Ride one shot that Pius Bak did. Even though they worked together on this book, Eat the Rich, but he colored the main series there. And I've also seen his name come up, interestingly enough, on a couple image books that are drawn by Tyler Boss. Tyler Boss is someone who really his work is most tied to writer Matthew Rosenberg, whether we're talking
Oh,
about
sure.
like Fork is walking to a bank, or what's the furthest place from here, which is the current kind of their ongoing book there. But Roman Titov colored a few issues of What's the Furthest Place from Here, drawn by Tyler Boss, and also Boss guest artist an issue of the Department of Truth, James Tynan's series with artist Martin Simons. Uh, they had a kind of a section there where they're bringing different artists in to bring different feel and style to that series. And in the issue that Tyler Boss drew, Roman Titov again did the coloring. So it's interesting to see that maybe he's kind of hooked up with Tyler Boss on some stuff, kind of going forward, seeing maybe where whatever books Tyler's working on that we may see more of Titov's coloring. So
Yeah. Yeah. Minor correction. I think by the time this book is out or this episode is out, What's the Furthest Place from Here will be concluded because that ended on
okay.
18. Yeah.
Very possible. Very
Which
possible.
I
So
think was out in December 2023. But either way,
possible.
it was a long ongoing
was ongoing, and
right, right.
I think Roman colored maybe the back half or back portion of those issues for
Yeah,
Tyler. So it wasn't
I
the
believe
entire
that's correct.
series. Yeah, but it's like they started working together and have kind of continued. So
And Roman's coloring fits that Matt Rosenberg style so well.
yeah, there's
As I was looking at this
there's a
book,
flatness to it. Yeah,
yes, and I was going to say it reminded me of our conversation. If you didn't listen to it, go check it out with Lee Lowridge, which I think is the most in-depth look you will ever get at comic coloring because the dude's literally done thousands of books
yeah,
and has very strong opinions on these
yeah,
things.
yeah,
And he can do flat or modeled, but
yeah.
you know, the coloring in Eat the Rich reminded me of Lee's work. When Lee does like a Deadly Class or something.
Yeah, well,
Or even the
yeah.
Good Asian, his coloring work there where it's
It
flat.
definitely it fits, and I think that's one thing I think about when I think about these books here in terms of just the way they look on the page. Because when we get to Know Your Station, um, obviously the setting and the time frame are completely different than Eat the Rich. But you just get there's a completely different visual style, not just because there's a different art team, but I think the story requires it. Eat the Rich, it it
It's trippy.
yeah,
Yeah.
it needs to have this kind of flatness to it. I think that's intentional versus what you see in Know the Station, as it talked about. And we're talking about billionaires, ultra billionaires in a space station. So there's just naturally going to be a different feel to it. So it's very cool, and I think you're right there that the way that the books that Tyler Ross works on, there's a necessity and a feel of just there's a flatness to the colors, a little more muted, not super bright, not super neon. I think we see that in Titov's work, here in Eat the Rich as well. So it does kind of make sense.
Yeah. And that's not to say that, he's not capable of something, but
Oh yeah,
he has a
yeah.
style
Yeah, and
and
who
the
knows?
style's perfectly suited for Eat the Rich.
Maybe if we found some of these Russian comics, and maybe stuff's wildly dynamic over there. But again, I don't read. I can't read the Cyrillic alphabet, so I have no idea. Um, but so to wrap up the Eat the Rich team here, will be a connective tissue between the two books is the letterer. Letterer is Cardinal Ray. She did both these books. A lot of indie books. If you see her titles, there's real minimal Marvel DC that they've done. A couple notable Image books. The one that I'm aware of is Crowded, which is a really fun, kind of goofy, oddball book. The other one was Rose, the book that I didn't read. But again, we're talking about creative teams on all levels that are mainly smaller press, independent books. Although I guess at some point, I can't be calling Dark Horse, Image, Boom, IDW a small press. They're really not, but they are
No,
still
they are indie. Yeah.
they are
They're
still
still creator
indie.
owned.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of creator owned stuff. Again, a lot of licensed stuff. Which I guess is a way to get your foot in the door, get working on it, and to keep working there. So, we'll talk about the lettering as we go in both these books. But so between writer Sarah Gailey and letterer Cardinal Ray, those are the two common pieces in both these books here. So before we move on
And
to
quite
yeah.
different lettering work from book to book, which we'll get into in the
Yeah,
particular
we'll
episodes.
talk about
But
that. But again, I think it comes down to, I think really that comes down to the setting of both these books,
right,
which we were just talking about in terms of what's required of the coloring. Because you can take your pencil style and kind of do whatever you want with that, but in terms of the setting and the tone you want each book to be set, I think your colors and your letters really can get that across to the audience. Where yeah, the fonts you use, the styles you use, can set your book apart in terms of, are you in our world, a version of our world? Are you in the future? Are you in the past? Things like that. So we'll discuss that, and it'll be cool to see, how we're talking about one letterer in two vastly different books. Again, something different than some of the other kind of spiritual series that we've talked about. So
yeah.
yeah,
So let's
yeah,
get to the rest of the Know Your Station crew,
sure,
which is just two remaining people,
yeah.
Liana Kangas,
Liana Kangas, yep,
who
and
they did the art, which I think would again be pencils and inks,
I believe so.
um,
Yeah.
and then the colorist Rebecca Nolte.
Yeah. So Liana Kangas, they have a ton of credits of covers and variant covers across a broad spectrum of stuff. Um, you're going to see uh, it's a broad spectrum of stuff, but I believe it's almost all independent publishers.
Yeah,
I don't think they have any big two work on their CV, but it's a ton of covers. Like you can scroll through and you see the books that they've worked on, and it's just like one issue, one issue, one issue, one issue, or 5 issues, 6 issues, and you look at it up. It's because they did the covers for the main series, or they did all the variants for a miniseries or something like that. So there are artists out there.
it's
In
got to
terms
be
of
a tough way to make a living, in my estimation of
yeah,
it. But it's like,
but
I
if
guess
you're,
if you're getting steady work, it's steady
it
work,
is
but
it's
it's
it
not
depends.
like the comfort of an ongoing.
Maybe so, but it depends though on your level of notoriety, I guess. There's someone like Art Germ, Stanley Lau, and all
Sure.
the guys in his studio who just do covers. And they're some of the most popular artists out there. There's someone like Jenny Frison, who, as far as I know, only does covers. You know,
Yeah.
main covers, variant covers, and people buy books just because her art's on it. The people on this podcast included. We talked about
Right.
Stephanie Hans when we did Die.
Right.
Um, Die was her only really ongoing work ever. She did a couple interiors for some other Marvel stuff with Kieran Gillen, the writer of Die, but she's a cover artist almost exclusively. So I guess it's a way to go. I don't know if people know Leanna's name as much, probably not. But they do have some interior work, not a whole lot. Know Your Station, obviously, we're talking about now. A book from Vault Comics called She Said Destroy, with writer Joe Carolla. Another interesting book here. They did a book called Black AF: Devil's Die.
Oh yeah.
Now
Yeah.
Black AF is the spin-off header for the larger, we'll call it, Black universe. Black was a series that looked at the idea of a world where only Black people had superpowers, where they would manifest powers very similar to like mutants, where you hit a certain age, the thing inside you activates, and you develop some sort of power there, which is a not so subtle uh, commentary on race relations in this country. But there were a bunch of spin-offs, and Liana Kangas did Devil's Die with writer Vidayala. Vidayala, who has done a number of indie stuff, wrote a James Bond book, and is also currently at Marvel doing a lot of really, really, really cool stuff as well. But I didn't know Leanna's work from that. Looking back on it now, it's like, oh yeah, I read something by her. So that was kind of cool to see, to go back and take a look at. The last other kind of ongoing that Liana Kangas has is True Cult. We're pronouncing it True Cult, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, it's
I
spelled
believe that is how they said it to me
okay, yeah, because
at
it's spelled TRVEKVLT. So
Right.
the U's are both V's, but I believe it's supposed to be True Cult. That's a book from IDW, with writer Scott Bryan Wilson. It's a book. It's got some horror elements to it. I think it's the kind of thing that we see. Uh, I think something that she excels at in the books that I've read by her, where we start in a very mundane world, even if it's like a science fiction world. You start in a very mundane place, but things then spiral out into, I'm going to say a much gorier, but a much more maybe horrific way. However you
Which
define
is,
horrific. Yeah.
I mean, but that's a sign that it sounds similar to me when we were talking about James Tynion with the Apocalyptic trilogy,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
James was always saying, like, how do I escalate it? How,
Yeah. Yeah.
like, in 5 steps, how do I get to the end of the world?
Yeah.
Basically, from uh,
Yeah.
I forget
And
the
I
prom
think
dress
something
example.
like True Cult starts with like a lifelong fast food worker who is planning what he thinks is the perfect heist, and I think that somehow trips into some larger like satanic, like potential satanic cult kind of thing. So you start this very mundane place of a fast food worker just trying to get rich, and you end up in a completely different place there. So yeah, that again, in terms of ongoing interior stuff, not as much there again, but it's all indie work. Uh, oh, you know what? Something I did want to mention, very, very small thing. But I wanted to shout out Liana Kangas has an entry in a book that's called Meanwhile, a comic shop anthology, which was a anthology book that was put together by two guys, Ryan Higgins and Kevin Sharp. They edited this book. They host a podcast called The Comics Conspiracy. Ryan Higgins is the owner of the shop, The Comics Conspiracy, which is in Sunnyvale, California. It's out in the South Bay area, outside San Jose. I've been in that shop before. I've listened to that podcast. And that podcast is like 12 some odd, 13 some odd years old. It's the comic owner, Ryan, some guys he works with, guys he shops there, and they talk. It's a weekly thing. They talk about the news. They talk about books, what they like, what they don't like, what's selling. They talk about industry talk, all sorts of things there. But this anthology book that they put together, I believe the prompt was just write a story about the comic shop experience, whether
Oh,
that's whether
interesting.
that's
Yeah.
owning, working, reading, buying, creating, whatever it is. It was about the comic shop experience. And Leanna has a little a little, I think, 7 or 8 page story, um, written and drawn by them. So it's in black and white. It's not colored, but it's just it's a neat entry that's it's uh, in this anthology, which I wanted to shout out because I know Ryan Higgins a little bit. It's like I know of him. I've met him. I've talked to him both in person and online. Um, Most of what I know about the business of owning a comic shop comes from both the guy who owns the shop that we go to here in Cincinnati, Kendall, who owns Up and Away, and from Ryan Higgins, who both run very different shops because they both live in wildly different parts of the country. But in terms of how to run a shop, what it means, what it takes, what some of the behind the scenes stuff is, been listening and reading Ryan stuff for a long time. So wanted to shout out Meanwhile, a comic shop anthology. Something I think is worth checking out, which is a lot of fun. So it was cool
Yeah.
to see. It was cool to see their name in that there.
That's actually a very cool concept for a book
Yeah,
because,
yeah, because
um,
you get wildly different ideas, in
oh
terms of
yeah.
with a prompt that seems when you talk about the comic shop experience, most people will think about what the experience is of going to a comic shop, and there are stories that are like that, but you get some, when you get some, again, we got some big name creators in this anthology, but you get some wild takes that are really, really cool and out there. So yeah, it was a cool book to go read. So I think if you search that, Meanwhile, a comic shop anthology, I think they're still, I know they're digital versions you can buy, and I'm sure they still have physical copies as well. If you were to go out and pay the shipping, they'll send it out to you. But I think it's something worthwhile to read. It's a neat story. It was a neat concept, and I know those guys put a lot of hard work into getting that together. So
Yeah.
yeah, I guess we'll wrap up the credit teams here on this kind of double credit spotlight with, as you mentioned, the colorist for Nerd Station, which is Rebecca Nolte. Um, the running theme again, we're talking about licensed properties, indie publishers, uh, most for notable titles, at Dynamite, uh, Xenia Book, Vampirella, Red Sonja, Star Wars High Republic Adventures, which is the IDW all ages version. So that's not the Star Wars books over at Marvel, but the books that they license out, the Star Wars Adventures over at IDW there. She's worked on Radiant Pink at Image, which is part of the what is it, the Massive Verse? That's what it's called in there.
Yeah.
That Kyle Higgins
Higgins.
and
Yeah.
crew has spearheaded. They're basically create their own Power Rangers esque series, I guess. Radiant Pink being one of the spinoff and side books there. Um, a really fun book that Rebecca Nalty colored that I enjoyed was it's called Heavy Vinyl. It's from Boom. It was originally called Hi-Fi Fight Club. That 2 or 3 issues into their 4 issue miniseries, they had to change, and it became Heavy Vinyl. I don't know why, but I'm sure it was a licensing issue where they
Yeah.
couldn't call it
Something
that.
overseas market or
Yeah,
something like
yeah,
that. It's like
um,
the Great British Bake Off
yeah. Well,
not being allowed to use that. I even forget which one is American, which one's British. But there was
yeah.
something where like Pillsbury owns the Bake Off or something, and it has to
Isn't
be
it?
called the Great
It
British Cooking Show or something over here.
I was saying, I think it's whatever baking show in America, right?
Right.
Yeah,
But
something like
there is
that.
that comic that
Yeah,
came out last year that was the Great British Bump Off,
Bump Off. Yeah. That was the
which
John Allison comic. Yeah,
yeah,
which is a lot of fun.
good luck
But
touching that one, Pillsbury.
yeah, but Heavy Vinyl is a real fun book. Interesting about that in terms of what I've read that Rebecca Nalty has worked on. That book was a period piece set in the 90s at a record shop, um, but it had very very bright, very vibrant colors. Um, they really popped off the page there. So when we talk about what we see in Know Your Station and kind of the difference between the two books there, I think when you see a lot of Liana Kangas's work, it's very neon, I guess. It's very fluorescent.
Yeah.
Whether they're coloring themselves or the books that they have and work with other colorists. And so it's interesting to see that the one book I've read that Rebecca Nalty has colored had this kind of bright and vibrant look to it. Said versus what we just talked about with Eat the Rich and some of the work that Roman Titov has colored, which is very very flat, a little more muted. Gives you
I
a
mean,
different kind of
yeah, it's flat and clean,
yeah,
whereas this
yeah,
is almost distressed, distorted,
but
fluorescent.
it's very very fluorescent. And I think if you see again, if you look at some of the covers, whether they're the main covers or variant covers that Liana Kangas has done, um, which I assume then that they have drawn and colored themselves, because a lot of those I don't. Some of those colors, some of those covers, there's a separate colorist listed, sometimes not. So when they're doing work on their own there is a vibrancy, there's a fluorescent and neonness to it, a brightness to it, um that I think maybe just be their natural style. And I think we see that in Know Your Station. I think something that again, when we talk about the compare and contrast these two books here, um how the setting of the story both facilitates and requires a different feel, a different vibe in the art there. And so I think we'll see that. And so I think we have a colorist in Rebecca Nalty that I think really fits what Liana Kangas' style tends to be naturally. Like
Yeah.
if they were left to color to their own devices to color their own book, the kind of thing that we would see. And I think also if you pick up another book, like if you pick up True Cult and you look at those issues or pick up that trade, like that trade is like the main color on that trade dress is like hot pink, like
Oh
it
yeah,
jumps out. There's a brightness, a vibrancy to it.
which I bought directly from Leanna at the Columbus Galaxy Con, which our last episode was our road trip there.
Yes, yeah, which was recorded on the way up there.
Right, and now we're a month later recording the next thing. But
yeah.
and I think you and I both have Leanna's cover signed by Leanna, right?
Yes, yeah.
The A
I
cover
have,
was Leanna's cover, and I have the Virgin variant.
yes, yeah. They did all the main covers for Know Your Station. There were some variants as well, but I believe they did all the main covers.
Oh, I
Um,
really want the Jenny Frison variant for Know Your Station. I don't know if you saw it. It looked like one of the Mitch covers for Strange Adventures.
I don't know if I know
And
that one.
yeah,
I have
no,
the
I
Eat the
hadn't
Rich
seen it
one.
until I was like Googling stuff for this podcast episode because it just wasn't in retail shops. It was like a 25
Oh
uh
yeah,
eh,
it's a 1 in 25 variant. Yeah, yeah,
and then
yeah.
there's
That's
a 1 in
tougher.
50 that has the word Know Your Station on it. The Virgin is the 1 in 25. It's kind of backwards. Um but it's funny to me that Jenny Frison is how I found Sarah Gailey, and then I find Liana uh, through Sarah Gailey, and then I stumble upon like, oh, and Jenny Frison did a cover for this book. It just didn't happen to show up anywhere because
Yeah.
I think the Eat the Rich Jenny Frison was like a 1 in 5, or maybe it was just the B cover. It wasn't. I don't know if it was an incentive. So it was like on the rack at my comic shop, whereas it's like Know Your Station. Sarah's name is up and coming, and I'd imagine the book did pretty well for the size that it is. I think it's got decent reviews and such, but asking small local comic shops to order 25 or 50 copies,
It's tougher. I mean,
it's tough.
there are some shops that, and look, the shops in our area, um,
There's so
that they're
many. If we were
well,
like
there
a
are a ton of
mid-sized
shops.
city with
There are a
one
ton of
comic
shops.
shop,
Yeah.
maybe they would do it.
Well, they're also they're big too heavy. They just are.
Yeah.
But there are shops that are out there that are super indie heavy. And there are shops that are specifically boom heavy, you know. And maybe they would have that. So just real quick, that the Frison variant for Eat the Rich #1, the regular cover was just an open order. There was a 1 in 25 that was
Yeah,
black
I
and
saw
white
the
with just
regular.
the red, and then there was a 1 in 50 that was foil. So it had incentive levels to it, but I think the cover that you and I both have is just the regular one. So that was open order. So, but yeah, it is tougher. But I mean, if you scroll through, like in the back of most boom books, there's a listing of shops, um, or a partial listing of shops both around the country and around the world that are like Boom's shops, like people that they partner with, who are more likely to order larger numbers of issues, to get those 1 in
Right.
25, 1 in 50s kind of thing. We just don't have those shops in our area. Maybe wherever you're listening, you have a shop that is more conducive to that. I'd love it if we could. I know with some of those indie books, uh, in terms of getting the book ordered, I mean, that's easy. You place an order, you're going to get it. But getting some of those variants, um, you know, especially the incentive ones, but just trying to get some of the variants for some of these boom books that are smaller runs. It can be tough, and that's where you have to go to either a show and get it directly from the artist, or a secondary market kind of thing. But yeah, it's who knows though. As I think we had mentioned before a couple of times, whenever we talk about Boom, specifically Boom Studios, last 5 some odd years, their stock's really rising to the point where I think I said somewhere that it felt like they were the #4 publisher now, like solidly #4 publisher
I
behind
think you said that
Marvel,
back in our
DC,
Grass
Image.
Kings, which is at least a year and a half, 2 years ago. Um, yeah, and I think based on who has the next big tentpole ongoing series,
Yeah.
Boom could surpass Image theoretically, but
I, I,
with
I,
Saga running again and like a number of good tent poles, I think Image is safe
I think Image
and their
is
history.
yeah. Image has the history. I think they're solidly in third, but I think that gap is closing. As long as James Tynion the fourth keeps writing books for them and the Slaughterverse keeps going, um, you know, Tom King just started a book over there with Peter
Oh,
Gross, Animal Pound.
it's really good.
It's
God,
a
it's
it's
so good.
it's a miniseries, but
I know.
you get his name out there because again, Tom King is one of those guys, people on this call included, who has his own audience, just like James Tynion the fourth. And anything
Right.
James Tynion does, no matter what publisher it's on, because his stuff goes everywhere. He has deals with seemingly every publisher. If he's got a book out that he's written, his fans go and get it. And Tom King is one of those guys now. As he starts doing more and more stuff not just for DC. Whether it's his image book Love Everlasting with Elsa Chartier, or now Animal Pound at Boom, with Peter Gross. The audience is going to follow him, and maybe some of those people had never read a Boom book before. It's entirely possible. People who only know his stuff from DC, only read DC stuff, maybe never read a book from Boom or any of these other publishers, are going to jump over there because they got to get his book. You got to have his stuff. And so Boom is on the rise. They've been on the rise, and they feel like they're still on the rise, and I think it's very conceivable we could look back in a few years, when someone like Sarah Gailey, who is seemingly most primed of this group to really break out. I don't think someone like Liana Kangas, as much as I think you and I like and adore her art, I don't think they're looking to jump to anything outside of, maybe if the opportunity was there, who knows? I'm not going to speak for them, but Sarah Gailey is someone who seems the most primed to have a much larger name in comics 5 years from now.
Sure.
Where you look at it and you realize,
well, I mean, and
they
if nothing else, because they're a writer. And
it can be
like
easier
we
there.
say it all the time on this podcast. It's about these creative teams and pairings, but it is for some reason considered a writer's industry.
But what I was saying is, we could look back in like 5 or 6 years, and see Sarah Gailey's name maybe on some big Marvel title, or a huge creator-owned book. Something that comes out and is immediately gobbled up, the adaptation rights by Amazon or Apple or whoever it is. Someone picks it up, and you look back on it, you're like, hey, do you read their earlier stuff over at Boom? Eat the Rich and Know Your Station. Oh, I haven't read those books before. Wow, they wrote those books then, and so you get a sense of Boom being the place that launches someone into something bigger.
Yeah.
They continue to cultivate that reputation, because they've given an unknown comic writer, again, Sarah Gailey has an audience from their prose work, but an unknown comics writer, get them in the door, give them a chance to tell their stories, and then watch as that person goes and blows up. And I think that's definitely in the cards potentially here for someone like Sarah Gailey.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think that's everything I have. You've had to restrain me several times from getting into the weeds on these books. So clearly I'm ready to dive in. So grab Eat the Rich. That's
what the next episodes are for, the actual discussion of the books here.
So grab Eat the Rich 1-5 or the trade. And we'll see you next week. And then the following week, if you want to plan ahead, Know Your Station, that's what's on the horizon. And then after that, I feel comfortable announcing it because it is scheduled, even though it's not in the can yet. We do have an interview with Liana Kangas, where I think we'll discuss that, and we'll probably let them talk about True Cult a bit. We'll have a spoiler warning, if there's any content. But if you want to support the artists that we're talking about here, go ahead and pick up True Cult. I'm currently
just because we don't
it.
talk about it doesn't mean you shouldn't read it.
You
should go read everything. So.
Yeah, read.
That's literal.
That's Alex's. Everything. Alex's New Year's resolution for you is read everything.
Read everything. I wasn't an illusion. No. Go out and read everything. Every book out there, go and read it. It's worth your time, definitely.
Yeah. Alex is not currently endorsed or paid by a comic shop, but I think you're open to this type of endorsements. Yeah.
Yes. I will shill on behalf of your shop to try to sell every issue in your building. Yes. So I'm sure I can do it too.
All right. Well, we will see you next week for Eat the Rich by Sarah Gailey and
Pius Bak.
I almost said Liana Kangas.
We're not there yet.
I got myself all messed up. Anyway, we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.
That was good. Peace.